What if the shinobi world was only one layer of reality? What if chakra didn't stop at planets, but ruled dimensions, timelines, and gods themselves? This is the story of Naruto Uzumaki. Not as a Hokage, not as a hero, but as the Celestial Harem King. A ruler beyond space, a sovereign above time, a man whose will binds worlds together, and whose flame bends gods to their knees. Love is no longer weakness. Power is no longer limited. Destiny is no longer fixed. Welcome to Will of Fire Stories, where dimensions collide, where legends transcend reality, and where Naruto doesn't just protect existence. He controls it. This is not a what if. This is the rise of the Celestial Harem King. Chapter 1. The Shattering of the Seal. The atmosphere in the hidden AF village was thick with the scent of ozone and charred earth. High above the Hokage rock, the sky didn't just darken, it fractured. Spirals of violet and crimson lightning tore through the clouds, converging on a single point, Naruto Uzumaki. He wasn't the boy the villagers once shunned, nor was he the hero they had come to worship. He stood at the epicenter of a spatial collapse, his orange jumpsuit tattered, revealing skin etched with glowing, ethereal seals that pulsed like a second heartbeat. Kurama's chakra, once a roaring torrent of red hate and later a golden flame of partnership, had transmuted. It was now a shimmering, translucent white, the color of stars being born. Sasuke, get back, Kakashi Hatake yelled, his Sharingan spinning wildly as he tried to comprehend the gravitational anomaly. But Sasuke Uchiha remained frozen. His Rinnegan was vibrating in its socket, reacting to a frequency it shouldn't be able to perceive. It's not just chakra, Kakashi. He's pulling the dimensions themselves into his core. He's becoming the anchor. Naruto's eyes snapped open. They were no longer blue or slit-pupilled. They were vast, swirling nebulas containing the depth of 1,000 galaxies. As he raised his hand, the very air groaned. A rift opened behind him, not a portal to a specific land, but a gateway to the celestial throne, a realm existing between the folds of time and space. The cycle of hatred wasn't just about our world, Naruto's voice echoed, sounding like a chorus of 1,000,000 souls. It was a leak from the higher planes. To save one world, I must govern them all. The call of the infinite. As the rift expanded, the gravity of Konoha shifted. Pebbles began to float. Shinobi from all nations, gathered for the aftermath of the war, fell to their knees. It wasn't just power they felt. It was an ancestral recognition. Hinata Hyuga stepped forward, her Byakugan activated. She saw through the physical form of her beloved and into the tapestry of his soul. He wasn't disappearing, he was ascending. Naruto-kun, you're leaving us. Naruto looked down, a soft, melancholic smile crossing his face. I'm not leaving, Hinata. I'm opening the doors. The barriers between the mortal, the spirit, and the divine are falling. I will be the bridge, but I cannot do it alone. The dimensions require a balance, a union of hearts to keep the fabric from tearing. Suddenly, Kagaya Otsutsuki's essence, supposed to be sealed forever, flickered in the periphery of the rift. But she wasn't attacking, she was kneeling. The progenitor of chakra recognized a new sovereign, the Celestial King. The first ascension. With a final surge of energy, the ground beneath Naruto vanished. He ascended into the rift, his presence expanding until he could feel the pulse of the frost dimension, the gravity dimension, and thousands of unnamed realms beyond. The transition was violent and beautiful. Naruto felt his consciousness splinter and reform. He saw the harem of the heavens, not a collection of concubines in the mortal sense, but the muses of reality. Powerful entities, priestesses, and warriors from across the multiverse whose spirits were tied to the health of their respective dimensions. As he reached the center of the celestial throne, a massive palace of living light, he realized the magnitude of his task. He was the king, the arbiter of all existence. His first act was to reach through the void and pull his first tether to the mortal realm, Hinata. Her soul, resonated by her pure love and the Hamura lineage, was pulled into the celestial light to stand by his side as the first pillar of the new world. The era of shinobi is over, Naruto proclaimed, his voice shaking the foundations of every reality. The era of the celestial reign begins. Across the dimensions, ancient queens and powerful goddesses felt the shift. From the cold reaches of the ice wastes to the burning hearts of the magma seas, they turned their heads toward the center of the universe. The king had arrived. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Weaver of Frost and the First Decree. The celestial throne did not sit upon solid ground. It drifted within the ethereum, a shimmering expanse. where the laws of physics were merely suggestions. Naruto sat upon a chair carved from solidified starlight, his mind racing. Beside him, Hinata stood in a gown of woven moonlight, her Byakugan now glowing with a soft, iridescent hue that allowed her to see the ley lines of entire universes. "It's too much, isn't it?" Naruto whispered, his voice resonating through the pillars of the hall. "I can hear them, every prayer, every scream, every breath across 1,000 worlds. You are the heart now, Naruto-kun," Hinata replied, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "The heart doesn't just feel the rhythm, it sets it." Their moment of quiet was shattered as the air in the throne room dropped to a temperature that would have shattered steel. Frost blossomed across the starlight floor, creeping up the pillars in intricate, jagged patterns. From a swirling vortex of snow and diamond dust, a figure emerged. She was tall, draped in robes of glacial blue that seemed to flow like liquid nitrogen. Her hair was a cascade of silver, and her eyes were the piercing, unforgiving blue of a frozen sun. This was Kura no Okami, the primordial goddess of the frost dimensions, a realm Naruto had once visited briefly during his battle with Kaguya, but had never truly understood the challenge of the glacial queen. "So," the goddess spoke, her voice like the cracking of a frozen lake. "The brat who I inherited the fox's spark thinks he can claim the mantle of the All-Father. You sit upon the throne of the Otsutsuki, yet you smell of ramen and sweat." Naruto didn't flinch, he stood, and as he did, the golden warmth of his new chakra pushed back the frost. "I didn't ask for the throne, but I'm not letting the dimensions fall into chaos. Your realm is bleeding, Kura. The borders are fraying because you've isolated yourself for too long." Quote, Kura no Okami scoffed, summoning a lance of absolute zero ice. "My realm is pure because it is cold. You speak of union and harem, a king who gathers the hearts of the worlds. Prove to me that your heart is strong enough to withstand the frost of a goddess, or I shall turn this palace into your tomb." She lunged, her speed bypassing the concept of distance. But Naruto didn't reach for a kunai. He reached for the connection. The melodic synthesis. As the ice lance touched his chest, Naruto didn't repel it. He absorbed the cold. He used the 6 paths sage power to harmonize with her frequency. He saw her memories, the eons of loneliness, the burden of maintaining the thermal balance of 100 subdimensions, and the fear that the great void would eventually consume her world. He stepped into her personal space, his hands gently catching her wrists. "You're tired of being the only thing keeping the world from melting, aren't you?" The goddess froze, not from her own power, but from the shock of being seen. No mortal or god had ever dared to look past her armor of ice. "I'm building a council," Naruto said, his voice dropping to a comforting warmth. "A union where no one has to carry a dimension alone. Be the pillar of the north, Kura. Join my court, not as a servant, but as a part of the celestial heart." The ice lance shattered into harmless glitter. Kura no Okami's expression softened, the coldness in her eyes replaced by a shimmering curiosity. She bowed her head, her silver hair falling forward. "The dimensions have been cold for so long. If you truly offer a warmth that does not consume, then I am yours, Celestial King." The first decree. As Kura took her place on the left side of the throne, a brand appeared on her yarbone, the mark of the Celestial Harem, a seal that didn't bind her will, but linked her power directly to Naruto's. Naruto turned back to the great viewing pool in the center of the room. He saw the magma dimensions beginning to stir. Sensing the shift in the frost, far away, in a realm of infinite greenery, a queen of thorns was already sharpening her vines. "One down," Naruto muttered, a grin finally breaking through his royal composure. "How many dimensions did you say there were, Kurama?" Inside his mind, the 9 tails, now a celestial entity of white fur and starlight, chortled. "More than you have ramen recipes for, kid. Better get started." Naruto raised his hand, sending a pulse of energy through the multiverse. "Hear me, I am Naruto Uzumaki. I am the king of the dimensions. I summon the representatives of the great elements. Come to the throne, or I shall come to you." The sky of every world turned gold. The hunt for the goddesses had begun. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Heart of the Supernova. The transition from the chilling elegance of the frost dimension to the magma dimensions was like being plunged into the core of a dying sun. The air was not merely hot, it was heavy, thick with the scent of sulfur and the roar of perpetual combustion. Rivers of white-hot slag flowed uphill, defying gravity, carving glowing veins through obsidian mountains that floated in a sky of bruised purple smoke. Naruto stood on a platform of hardened basalt, his Celestial King robes shimmering to deflect the ambient heat. Beside him, Kura no Okami frowned, her very presence creating a localized mist as her frost reacted to the extreme environment. "This place is crude," Kura remarked, her voice echoing over the bubbling lava. "It is ruled by Ignis, a being of pure volatile emotion. She does not negotiate with words. She negotiates with eruptions." "Sounds like my kind of person," Naruto joked, though his eyes were sharp. He could feel the tectonic plates of this entire dimension shifting, responding to his arrival like a beast baring its teeth. The Queen of Cinder. The ground beneath them didn't just shake, it exploded. A pillar of fire shot 300 feet into the air, and from the flames stepped a woman who seemed carved from the sun itself. Her skin was a deep, radiant bronze, etched with glowing orange veins of flowing magma. Her hair was literally a mane of flickering flames, and her eyes burned with the intensity of a localized supernova. This was Ignis, the Cinder Queen, the sovereign of the volcanic realms. "So, the Frost Bitch has found a master," Ignis spat, her voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. She looked at Naruto, her gaze raking over his celestial marks. "You look soft, little king. You look like something that would melt under a second of my touch." "I've dealt with hotheads before," Naruto said, crossing his arms. "I'm not here to conquer your land, Ignis. I'm here to stabilize it. Your core is unstable. If you keep burning at this rate, your dimension will collapse into a black hole within a century. Then we go out in a blaze of glory." Ignis roared, summoning a whip made of compressed solar flares. "I don't need a king to tell me how to burn." The trial of internal heat. Ignis attacked with the ferocity of a solar storm. Every strike of her whip cracked the fabric of space, sending ripples of heat that could incinerate a moon. Naruto didn't dodge. He moved within the rhythm of her strikes, his body flickering in and out of the physical plane. He realized that Ignis wasn't just angry, she was overflowing. Her dimension was a pressure cooker. And she was the valve. She was suffering from a constant, agonizing buildup of energy that she had no way to release except through violence. As she lunged for a final, world-shattering blow, Naruto did the unthinkable. He dropped his guard and stepped into her embrace. The impact was blinding. The heat was enough to vaporize the memories of most men. But Naruto tapped into the 6 paths, yin-yang release. He opened his own chakra gates, acting as a heat sink, a vast, infinite reservoir. He began to draw the excess pressure out of Ignis and into himself. What are you doing?" Ignis gasped, her flames flickering. For the first time in millennia, the burning pressure behind her eyes was fading. The agony was being replaced by a cool, soothing void. Sharing the load, Naruto grunted, his skin glowing white-hot. "You don't have to explode to be felt, Ignis. A star can give life just as easily as it can take it." The fusion of souls. As the energy balanced between them, the chaotic magma rivers below calmed into a steady, rhythmic flow. The sky cleared, revealing a spectacular vista of stars through the smoke. Ignis collapsed against Naruto's chest, her hair turning from roaring fire to a soft, glowing auburn. She looked up at him, her fiery pride tempered by a new, overwhelming sensation, peace. She felt the connection to the Frost Queen and the Mortal Priestess. A network of power that made her feel whole rather than volatile. "You really are a fool," she whispered, a small, genuine smile tugging at her lips. "To take all that heat into yourself. You're either a god or the biggest idiot in all the dimensions." "I've been called both," Naruto grinned. He placed his hand over her heart, and the mark of the Celestial Harem bloomed on her shoulder, a brand of golden sunlight. The magma dimension settled into a new orbit within Naruto's consciousness, its power now feeding into the throne. Kura no Okami stepped forward, a rare, amused smirk on her face. "Welcome to the court, Cinder Queen. Try not to singe the carpets." Ignis stood tall, her hands sliding into Naruto's. "The carpets are boring anyway. Let's see what the rest of these dimensions have to offer." Naruto looked toward the horizon of the multiverse. 2 pillars were set, the balance was shifting, but in the shadows of the void dimensions, something ancient and cold was beginning to wake up. Displeased with the new king's light. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Labyrinth of Silken Lies. The shift from the roaring heat of the magma dimension to the dimension of whispers was unnerving. There was no sound here, only the internal echo of one's own heartbeat. The landscape was a surreal dreamscape of floating violet islands, connected by bridges of translucent silk. The sky was a permanent twilight, filled with drifting, glowing spores that hummed at a frequency that made the teeth ache. Naruto stepped onto the silken path, his boots making no sound. Behind him, Kura and Ignis walked with caution. Kura's ice was brittle here, and Ignis's flames felt muted, as if the very air was trying to swallow their energy. "Stay sharp," Naruto warned, his nebula eyes scanning the shifting fog. "In this place, your own thoughts can be turned into blades." "I don't like this, Naruto," Ignis hissed, her auburn hair flickering low. "It feels like someone is walking inside my skull." The mistress of the web. From the violet fog, a woman materialized, or rather, 1,000 versions of her did. She was draped in gossamer silks that shifted colors like oil on water. Her skin was the color of moonlight, and her hair was a mass of dark, shimmering tendrils that seemed to move of their own volition. This was Arachne Vex, the weaver of illusions, the entity who governed the sensory data of the multiverse. "The king and his collection," Vex whispered, her voice coming from every direction at once. "A queen of ice to hide his heart, and a queen of fire to burn his enemies. But what use is a king who cannot tell what is real from what is desired?" Suddenly, the world fractured. Naruto found himself standing back in the Hidden Leaf Village, but it was different. He was a child again, sitting on the swing, but everyone was smiling at him. Iruka, Kakashi, Jiraiya, even his parents, Minato and Kushina, were there, reaching out to him. "You can stay here," Vex's voice purred in his ear. "Why rule 1,000 dying worlds when you can live in the one perfect lie? I can give you the life you were robbed of." The piercing truth. Naruto looked at the illusory Minato and Kushina. His heart ached with a physical weight. For a moment, the Celestial King's glow dimmed. But then, he felt the tether, the golden marks on Kura and Ignis pulsed. He wasn't just Naruto Uzumaki anymore, he was the anchor of reality. "It's a beautiful dream," Naruto said softly. He reached out and touched the phantom of his mother's cheek. "But my mother didn't die so I could hide in a spider's web. She died so I could live in the real world, no matter how much it hurts." He closed his eyes and unleashed a wave of 6 paths, spiritual clarity. The illusion didn't just shatter, it dissolved into gold dust. Naruto stood back on the Violet Island, his hand gripped firmly around Vex's throat, not to crush it, but to ground her. He saw her true form. She was small, trembling, her eyes wide with terror. She wasn't a malicious monster. She was a collector of lost memories because she had none of her own. She was the dimension's witness, burdened by the collective trauma of all sentient life. Quote, "You're drowning in everyone else's stories, Vex," Naruto said, his voice a gentle thunder. "Stop watching other people's lives and start living yours. Join us. Be the eyes of my kingdom, not the jailer of its dreams." The Weaver's surrender. Arachne Vex looked at the 2 queens standing behind Naruto. She saw the bond, the shared strength, and the lack of fear. She reached out, her delicate, ink-streaked, ained fingers touching the mark on Naruto's chest. "You would let a liar into your heart?" she asked, her voice finally coming from her own lips. "I'm the guy who befriended the demon that killed his parents," Naruto grinned. "A few illusions don't scare me." As she accepted the connection, the mark of the Celestial Harem appeared on her brow, glowing like a third eye. The violet fog lifted, revealing the dimension of whispers to be a place of breathtaking, crystalline beauty, the great archives of the universe. With the Weaver of Illusions on his side, Naruto now had the power to see through any deception in the multiverse. But as the 3 queens stood together, the stars above them began to turn a sickly, rotting green. The Otsutsuki remnants in the void had noticed the king was gathering his pillars. And they were preparing to strike at the heart of his new empire. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Siege of the Empyrean. The piece of the celestial throne was a fragile thing, a glass ornament held in the palm of a titan. It shattered at the stroke of the midnight hour. The Ethereum, once a sea of calm, translucent energy, curdled into a sickly shade of necrotic green. Naruto stood on the balcony of the Great Hall, his 3 queens flanking him. The air smelled of ozone and ancient dust. High above, the sky didn't fracture, it rotted. Massive, bone-white vessels, shaped like the ribcages of forgotten gods, tore through the dimensional fabric. "They've come," Kura no Okami whispered, her hands already frosting the banister. "The Otsutsuki remnants, the ones who refused the call to ascend. They don't want a king. They want a harvest." The Void Fleet. Leading the armada was Arashiki's shadow, a high priest named Zenshi. He descended on a platform of black gravity, his eyes possessing the golden rinnegan. Naruto Uzumaki, Zenchi's voice boomed, vibrating the very atoms of the palace. You play at divinity while sitting in the seat of our ancestors. You are a thief, a scavenger of chakra. We have come to reclaim the fruit of this reality. Thousands of white-cloaked warriors, each wielding a fragment of a 10 tails power, descended like a plague of locusts upon the floating islands. Ignis, take the front lines. Burn their path, Naruto commanded, his voice dropping into the low, resonant tone of the sovereign. Vex, cloud their minds. Make them fight their own shadows. Kura, freeze the gaps between dimensions, don't let their reinforcements through. The War of the Pillars. The battle was a symphony of cosmic elements. Ignis became a living sun, leaping into the void. With every roar, she unleashed waves of solar fire that melted the bone-white hulls of the Otsutsuki ships. Beside her, Vex wove a web of sensory static. The invaders found themselves swinging at phantoms. Their rinnegan blinded by a million false realities. Naruto didn't move, he watched Zenchi. The priest raised a hand, and a sphere of, all-killing ash, began to form, a concentrated point of entropy meant to erase the throne itself. I am the king, Naruto murmured. He stepped off the balcony, walking on the air as if it were solid ground. With every step, his golden cloak expanded, trailing behind him like a comet's tail. And a king protects his home. He met Zenchi in the center of the chaos. The Otsutsuki priest struck with a staff of black truth-seeker orbs, but Naruto caught it with his bare hand. The orbs, designed to disintegrate anything they touched, hissed and died against Naruto's celestial skin. You speak of harvesting lives like their grain, Naruto said, S nebula eyes flashing with a terrifying light. But you forgot one thing about this world. It's not yours anymore. It belongs to those who live in it. The sovereign's wrath. Naruto didn't use a Rasengan. He used the dimensional pulse. He reached out and gripped the very fabric of the space Zenchi occupied. With a sharp twist of his wrist, he folded the dimension. Zenchi screamed as his physical Orm was compressed into a singular point of light. Naruto didn't kill him, he banished him into the gap between worlds, a silent, timeless prison. Seeing their leader vanished, the Otsutsuki fleet wavered. Naruto raised his hand high, his chakra flaring until it eclipsed the suns of the surrounding systems. Begone. The shout was a physical force, a shockwave of pure sovereignty that pushed the ribcage ships back through the rifts, sealing the holes in reality with golden stitches of light. The aftermath. As the silence returned, Naruto landed softly on the palace floor. He was breathing hard, the strain of managing three-dimensional powers at once showing in the slight tremor of his hands. His queens gathered around him. Ignis was covered in soot, Kura's hair was wild, and Vex's eyes were glowing with a fierce intensity. They looked at him not just as a lover or a partner, but as the only thing standing between existence and the void. They'll be back, Hinata said, emerging from the inner sanctum. Her Byakugan scanning the far reaches of the stars. And they won't come alone next time. They'll bring the world eaters. Naruto looked at his growing harem, his heart hardening with a new resolve. Then we need more pillars. We need the power of the spirit dimensions. We're going to the land of the dead. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Silent Requiem of the Underworld. The transition to the land of the dead, the pure land, was not a jump through space, but a descent through the layers of consciousness. The vibrant gold of the celestial throne faded into a monochromatic world of silver mist and endless, still water. Here, there was no sun, only a pale, giant moon that hung low over a horizon of white lilies. Naruto walked upon the surface of the water, his footsteps creating ripples that carried the faint echoes of the deceased. Behind him, Vex shivered. As the weaver of illusions, she was sensitive to the weight of so many stagnant memories. This place feels finished, Ignis whispered, her flames flickering a dim, ghostly purple. There's no fuel here, no passion. That's because it's a graveyard of stars, a voice echoed. Standing beneath a weeping willow mad of translucent spirit energy was a woman of haunting beauty. Her skin was the color of fine porcelain, and her hair flowed behind her like a river of ink, dissolving into shadows at the tips. She wore a kimono of funeral white, adorned with spider lilies that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic glow. This was Izanami, the Warden of Souls, the entity who ensured that the cycle of reincarnation remained unbroken. The Trial of the Void. Naruto Uzumaki, Izanami said, her voice a soft, chilling melody. You have conquered the elements of the living. But the dead owe no soul tax to a king. Why have you come to disturb the silence? The Otsutsuki are tearing at the roots of reality, Naruto replied, his voice firm. If the living dimensions fall, the pure land becomes a buffet for the world eaters. I need the spirit pillar to anchor the foundations of the afterlife. Izanami drifted closer, her feet never touching the water. To rule the dead, you must understand the weight of loss. You have lost parents, teachers, and friends. But have you ever lost yourself? She raised a hand, and the water beneath Naruto's feet turned into a mirror. He saw himself, but it wasn't the king. It was the boy in the orphanage. The lonely child on the swing, the soldier who failed to save Neji. The weight of every soul he couldn't save began to pull at his ankles, dragging him into the dark, freezing depths of the spirit water. The king's sacrifice. Naruto didn't fight the descent. He let the water claim him. As he sank, he felt the cold despair of a trillion souls who had passed through this realm. He didn't use his power to push them away, he opened his heart to them. I know you, he thought, his spirit projecting a warmth that cut through the silver mist. I carry you with me. You aren't just the dead. You are the reason I fight for the living. Inside the darkness, Naruto's golden chakra didn't explode, it imploded, turning into a dense, solid core of pure will. He grabbed the chains of regret that were pulling him down and began to climb them. He broke the surface of the water, not as a drowning man, but as a redeemer. He reached out and took Izanami's hand. The cold of her touch was absolute, but the heat of his soul was unyielding. I'm not here to be your master, Izanami, Naruto said, pulling her close. I'm here to be your partner. The dead deserve a king who remembers them, and you deserve a king who reminds you what it's like to feel a heartbeat. The marriage of life and death. The silver moon above turned a brilliant, sun-like gold. The white lilies across the horizon bloomed into 1,000 colors. Izanami's porcelain skin flushed with the warmth of the living. She looked at Naruto with an expression that hadn't crossed her face in eons, hope. The cycle has been stagnant, she admitted, her voice trembling. The Otsutsuki have been stealing souls before they can reach my gates. If you can stop the theft, then my shadows are yours to command. She leaned in, her cold lips meeting his in a seal of eternal union. The mark of the celestial harem appeared on the nape of her neck, shaped like a black sun. Suddenly, the ground of the underworld shook. A massive, jagged rift tore through the silver sky. A mechanical, multi-eyed monstrosity, a world-eater scout, peered through the gap, its gaze locking onto the newly formed pillar. Naruto grinned, his hand tightening around Izanami's. Looks like we've got our first customer. Girls, let's show this thing why you don't mess with the king's court. The queens of ice, fire, illusion, and death stood together. Their combined power creating a corona of energy that lit up the entire land of the dead. The hunt was no longer just about gathering, it was about survival. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The Maw of the Void. The sky of the underworld didn't just break, it unraveled. The World Eater Scout, a creature the size of a tectonic plate, forced its way through the rift. It was a biomechanical nightmare, a mass of obsidian carapaces. Thousands of twitching, golden rinne eyes, and mandibles that vibrated at a frequency capable of liquefying bone. This was a scavenger of the deep cosmos, sent by the Otsutsuki to prune the weak dimensions. It's eating the spirit energy. Izanami cried out, her funeral robes whipping in the sudden, violent gale. It's draining the souls of the unbirthing. Naruto looked up, his face hardening into a mask of regal fury. The golden aura of the Celestial King flared, expanding until he stood as a giant of light against the encroaching darkness. Not on my watch, queens, to your positions. This isn't a skirmish, this is an execution. The elemental symphony. The battlefield was the mirror-like surface of the spirit water. Kura no Okami acted first. She raised her hands, and the vast ocean of the underworld surged upward, freezing instantly into jagged, mountain-sized spires of absolute zero ice. They pierced the soft underbelly of the World Eater, pinning the beast against the rift. Burn, you hollow husk, Ignis screamed. She launched herself into the air, her body becoming a streak of white-hot plasma. She slammed into the creature's central eye, her heat melting through the obsidian armor like a hot needle through wax. But the World Eater was a god slayer. It let out a screech that shattered the ice spires and sent a wave of antimatter rippling through the air. Vex, the weaver of illusions, danced through the chaos, her fingers weaving threads of sensory static. She created thousands of Naruto clones, each radiating a real chakra signature. The beast lashed out blindly, its massive mandibles snapping at phantoms while the real Naruto gathered energy. The power of the four pillars. Izanami, lend me the sorrow of the ages. Naruto commanded. The Warden of Souls placed her hands on Naruto's back. A dark, cold power flowed into him, tempering his golden light into something far more dangerous, gravitational collapse. By combining the heat of Ignis, the cold of Kura, the deception of Vex, and the finality of Izanami, Naruto formed a new technique. In his right hand, a Rasengan formed, but it wasn't blue or gold. It was a swirling sphere of pure white, surrounded by a ring of black void. Celestial Art. Event Horizon Rasengan. Naruto vanished. He reappeared directly in the center of the World Eater's maw. He didn't throw the attack, he detonated it from within. The explosion was silent. A point of infinite density formed inside the creature's heart, pulling its massive, necrotic mass into a single, crushing point. The World Eater didn't die, it was erased. The obsidian carapace, the golden eyes, and the mechanical limbs were sucked into the vacuum of the Rasengan, leaving nothing behind but a lingering scent of ozone and a shimmering residue of starlight. The coronation of the Vanguard. As the rift began to heal, Naruto descended back to the water's surface. He was glowing with an intensity that made even the queen squint. He had successfully fused the powers of 4 dimensions, and the strain was starting to reshape his very DNA. He was no longer just a man, he was becoming a living map of the multiverse. The 4 queens knelt before him, their marks glowing in unison. They were no longer separate entities, they were a collective, a harem of power that anchored Naruto's soul to reality. The World Eater was just a scout, Naruto said, his voice echoing with the authority of the throne. The main hive will be here soon. We need more than just elements and spirits. We need time. He looked toward the furthest reaches of the dimensional map, where the colors bled into a shimmering, golden clockwork. We're going to the Chrono Nexus. I need to find the goddess of the first second. But as he prepared for the jump, a familiar, chilling presence brushed against his mind. Sasuke Uchiha, now wandering the dimensional gaps, sent a warning through the Rinnegan link. Naruto, the Otsutsuki have found the origin point. They're targeting the past. Naruto's eyes flashed. Then we'll meet them in the beginning of time. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The Gears of the First Second. The Chrono Nexus was not a place of matter, but a realm of pure causality. Here, the sky was a shimmering golden clockwork where massive gears, light years in diameter, ground against one another to produce the tick of universal time. The air tasted like copper and old memories. Every step Naruto took echoed not just in the present, but in his past and future simultaneously. Be careful, Vex warned, her illusions flickering erratically. In this place, a single stray thought can rewrite your childhood or erase your descendants. I can feel it, Naruto muttered, his nebula eyes darting across the golden horizon. The Otsutsuki, they aren't just here to fight. They're trying to jam the gears. The Warden of the Hourglass. Standing at the center of the great pendulum was a woman who appeared to be in a state of constant flux. One moment she looked like a playful child, the next a regal queen, and then a withered crone. She wore a gown of spun starlight that trailed into a liquid gold tail of time sand. This was Chronos Rhea, the goddess of the first second. The king of the now enters the realm of always, Rhea spoke, her voice layered with 3 different ages. You come seeking to protect the timeline, Naruto Uzumaki. But the Otsutsuki have already poisoned the well. They are at the nexus of the fox, the moment of your birth. Naruto's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked into a shimmering temporal rift Rhea opened. He saw the hidden leaf village, 17 years in the past. He saw the 9 tails rampaging, and his parents, Minato and Kushina, standing before the death god seal. But standing behind them, hidden in the shadows of the past, was an Otsutsuki assassin with a blade of erasure. The paradox battle. I have to go back, Naruto growled, his golden cloak flaring. You cannot, Kura no Okami warned, grabbing his arm. If the king of the present enters the past, the paradox will shatter the multiverse. The Chrono Nexus will collapse. Then I'll go as a spirit, Naruto declared. He looked at Rhea. Connect me. Use the harem mark to bridge the gap. I'll provide the power, you provide the path. Rhea smiled, her form stabilizing into a beautiful woman with hair like molten bronze. A king who risks his very existence for a single moment in time. Very well, kneel. As Naruto knelt, Rhea placed her hands on his temples. The other four queens, Kura, Ignis, Vex, and Izanami, joined hands in a circle around him, funneling their elemental and spiritual energies into the temporal bridge. The birth of a legend, protected. Naruto's consciousness was hurled back through the golden gears. He arrived at the scene of his birth as a shimmering, invisible ghost of starlight. He saw the Otsutsuki assassin raising his blade to strike Minato as he performed the sealing. Not today. Naruto's spirit roared. He couldn't use physical force, so he used conceptual sovereignty. He reached out and grasped the thread of fate that the assassin was trying to cut. Naruto didn't kill the assassin. He simply erased him from the timeline by overriding his existence with the sheer volume of his own legend. As the seal was completed in the past, Minato Namikaze paused, looking toward the spot where Naruto's spirit stood. For a brief second, the fourth Hokage's eyes met his son's. "Thank you, Naruto," Minato whispered, as if he could feel the future king's presence. The fifth pillar. Naruto's spirit snapped back to the Chrono Nexus. He collapsed onto the golden floor, gasping for air, his golden cloak flickering. Ria stood over him, her eyes wide with awe. By saving his own birth without breaking the timeline, Naruto had proven he was the master of causality. "You have mended the first second," Ria said, kneeling before him. "The Otsutsuki's poison is purged. Time is now your ally." She leaned down and kissed his forehead. The mark of the Celestial Harem appeared on her palm, a golden hourglass. With Ria as the fifth pillar, Naruto now had the power to slow, stop, or rewind time within his personal domain. 6 pillars down, Naruto said, standing up with renewed strength. "But the void is screaming. The great weaver of the dark is coming for the throne." End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The Eclipse of the All-Father. The Chrono Nexus began to bleed. The golden gears, once humming with the rhythmic precision of eternity, suddenly groaned and seized. A viscous, oily Rkness, blacker than the vacuum of space, dripped from the seams of reality, dissolving the very concept of time where it touched. "The timeline is being choked," Ria cried out, her temporal form flickering violently between youth and age. "Something is reaching back from the end of existence to kill the beginning." From a tear in the sky that resembled a vertical, bleeding eye, a figure descended. He did not fly, he simply existed in the space he occupied, displacing reality around him. He was clad in robes of negative matter that swallowed all light. His skin was the gray of wood ash, and from his forehead grew a crown of jagged black horns that pulsed with a rhythmic, sickening violet light. This was Shibai Otsutsuki, the ascended god king of the Otsutsuki clan, the one who had discarded his physical body eons ago to become a multi-dimensional predator. The silence of the god king. Shibai did not speak with words. His presence was a psychic weight that forced the queens to their knees. Kura's ice shattered. Ignis's fire turned to cold soot. Vex's illusions were stripped away, Izanami's spirits fled, and Rei's time sand turned to lead. "You have gathered the fragments of a broken mirror, Naruto Uzumaki." Shibai's voice echoed directly inside Naruto's soul. "You think you are a king because you lead a handful of planetary spirits. I have consumed entire galaxies of such goddesses. You are a child playing with the embers of a dying fire." Shibai raised a finger. A beam of void chakra, the negation of all existence, shot toward Naruto. The sovereign's shield. Naruto didn't move, he stood his ground, but the golden glow of the Celestial King was being pushed back, dimming under the sheer pressure of Shibai's divinity. "I'm not leading fragments," Naruto spat, his teeth bared in a snarl of defiance. "I'm leading a family, something you threw away a long time ago." Naruto called upon the 5 pillars. He drew their power into his own body, not as a thief, but as a conduit. The marks on the queens' bodies flared with a desperate brilliance. He formed a 6 paths, ultra big ball celestial recentrican, but as it met Shibai's beam, the attack didn't explode, it began to dissolve. Shibai wasn't fighting Naruto, he was unmaking him. "Your existence is a mistake," Shibai murmured. "A glitch in the harvest. I shall return you to the nothingness from which you crawled." The sacrifice of the harem. As the void chakra began to creep up Naruto's arms, turning his golden skin to gray stone, Hinata stepped forward. She was the anchor, the one who tied Naruto to the mortal world. "If he is the heart, then we are the pulse," Hinata screamed. She didn't use her fists, she used her soul. She merged her Hamura lineage chakra with the elemental powers of the other queens. The 5 goddesses and the mortal queen formed a circle, their hands interlocking. They projected a field of infinite love, the one frequency Shibai, in his cold ascension, had forgotten how to calculate. This field acted as a buffer, a protective shell that halted the dissolution of Naruto's body. Naruto-kun, don't look at his power. Hinata's voice pierced the darkness. Look at the connections, look at the gaps between his atoms. Quote, the king's counter-strike, with the queens holding the line, Naruto saw the flaw. Shibai was so ascended that he was barely attached to reality. He was like a balloon held by a single string of ego. Naruto closed his eyes. He stopped trying to overpower the God King. Instead, he used the reverse harem technique, Celestial Edition. He didn't create clones of himself. He projected the memories of every person he had ever loved, every bond he had ever made, and every life he had ever touched. A billion ghosts of the multiverse, villagers, friends, enemies turned allies, flooded the chrono nexus. This sudden influx of reality and connection acted like a poison to Shibai's void essence. The God King recoiled, his form flickering as the weight of a bill. Lion souls anchored him to a physical plane he could no longer control. Now, Naruto roared. He lunged forward, his hand glowing with the combined light of the 5 pillars. He struck Shibai not in the chest, but in the crown. The black horns shattered. Shibai let out a soundless scream as he was blown back into the bleeding eye in the sky. The rift slammed shut, but not before Shibai's voice left a final chilling promise. The harem is a cage, little king. Eventually, the weight of their worlds will crush you. The weary victory. The darkness receded. The golden gears of the chrono nexus began to turn again. Naruto fell to one knee, his golden cloak tattered and dim. The queens rushed to his side, their own energies depleted. Naruto looked at his hands. They were still shaking. He had driven back a god. But he felt the truth in Shibai's words. The more dimensions he controlled, the more he became a target for things that lived in the dark. We need a final pillar, Naruto whispered, looking up at the mended sky. We need the goddess of the void itself. We need to turn the darkness into a weapon. But Naruto-kun, Hinata said softly, wiping blood from his cheek. The void is not a place. It's an entity. And she doesn't want to be ruled. She wants to be empty. Then I'll have to fill her with something, Naruto said, a familiar, stubborn glint returning to his eyes. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Embrace of the Absolute Nothing. The edge of non-existence was not a place, but a boundary. It was the white noise, at the end of the universe, a shore where the sea of reality simply stopped. There were no stars, no ground, and no air, only a crushing, silent vacuum that sought to pull the meaning out of every word and the color out of every soul. Naruto floated in this bleached expanse alone. He had forbidden his queens from following him. Their elemental natures were too defined, too real, to survive here. They would have been unraveled in seconds. Only the Celestial King, the anchor of all, could stand at the lip of the great drain. I know you're here, Naruto said, his voice carrying not through air, but through the vibration of his will. I can feel the hunger. The shadow of the all. From the nothingness, a shape formed. It didn't emerge, it was as if the vacuum itself took a silhouette. She was a void in the shape of a woman, a hole in the universe. Her hair was a veil of dark energy that contained the ghosts of dead stars, and her eyes were two perfect, terrifying circles of absolute white. This was Nihila, the goddess of the void, the personification of the end of all things. You bring a flicker of light to the maw of the eternal, Nihila spoke, her voice the sound of 1,000 extinguished suns. Why, little king, do you wish to be the last thing I consume? I'm here to offer you a job, Naruto replied, crossing his arms, his golden aura the only thing preventing him from being erased. The Otsutsuki are using your power, the void, to rot the dimensions. They're turning your hunger into a weapon of hate. I want you to turn it into a shield. The test of emptiness. Nihila laughed, a cold, hollow sound. I am not a shield. I am the inevitability of the finish line. Everything returns to me eventually. Why should I help you delay the end? She moved toward him, and as she did, Naruto's golden cloak began to flake away like ash. His memories, the taste of ramen, the weight of the Hokage hat, the warmth of Hinata's hand, began to feel distant, like dreams he had 1,000 years ago. Nihila was draining his self. To rule the dimensions, you must be everything. Nihila whispered, her cold hands cupping his face. But to rule the void, you must be nothing. Can you let go, Naruto? Can you be a king of no one? Naruto felt the terrifying pull of the abyss. For a moment, he wanted to give in. The weight of the thrones, the constant war, the screams of the dimensions, it could all go away. He could just stop. But then, he remembered the harem mark. It wasn't a brand of ownership, it was a link. He felt the pull of the 5 goddesses in Hinata. They weren't just his, they were him. The fullness of the void. I'm not going to be nothing, Naruto growled. His eyes snapping open, burning with a new, violet gold light. And I'm not going to let you be nothing, either. The void isn't just an end, nihila. It's the space where a new beginning starts. You're not the finish line, you're the soil. He reached out and pulled the goddess of the void into a fierce embrace. He didn't push his light into her, he invited her darkness into him. He showed her the vibrant, chaotic, messy beauty of the living worlds. He showed her that emptiness could be peace instead of hunger. Nihila gasped. For the first time since the dawn of time, the void felt full. The absolute white of her eyes gained a tiny, golden spark at the center, a pupil of hope. You are insane, she whispered, her dark form stabilizing into a woman. An of midnight-hued skin and silver robes. To fill the void with a heart, it shouldn't be possible. I'm full of surprises, Naruto grinned, though he was pale from the effort. The 6th pillar. Nihila knelt in the white expanse. As she did, the mark of the celestial harem appeared on her chest, right over her heart, a black hole ringed by a golden crown. With the 6th pillar established, Naruto's power underwent its final evolution. He no longer just glowed, he hummed with a frequency that balanced light and dark, being and non-being. He was the complete master of the multiverse. But as the bond solidified, a psychic scream ripped through the connection. It was Ria from the Chrono Nexus. Naruto, the Otsutsuki, they've stopped attacking the dimensions. They've gone to the source code. They're trying to delete the concept of chakra itself. Naruto's face went cold. Then the negotiations are over. It's time to delete the Otsutsuki. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. The Source Code of Creation. The source dimension was unlike any realm Naruto had ever visited. It was not composed of elements, spirits, or time, but of pure, geometric light. Massive ribbons of glowing binary and ANSI. Ent runes flowed through a white infinite, weaving the laws of physics and the blueprints of chakra into the tapestry of existence. This was the origin point, the motherboard of the multiverse. Naruto stood at the center of a floating crystalline platform, his 6 pillars surrounding him. Kura, Ignis, Vex, Izanami, Ria, and Nihila stood in a hexagonal formation, their combined auras creating a shimmering rainbow of cosmic power. If they change the code here, Ria warned, her voice trembling, it doesn't just kill us. It makes it so we never existed. The Naruto, who saved the world, the Odysseus who guarded the realms, all of it will be unwritten. The deletion squad, the Otsutsuki were already there. A council of 12 high priests, led by a revived and mutated version of Ashiki Otsutsuki, stood before the core pillar, a pillar of humming white light that dictated the flow of chakra across all dimensions. They were using null rods to pierce the core, injecting a virus of absolute stasis. Look at them, Ashiki sneered, his eyes spinning with a pattern that defied geometry. The king and his concubines come to plead for their reality. You are too late, Naruto. The deletion has already begun. Can't you feel your fingers becoming theoretical? Naruto looked down. His hand was flickering, turning into strings of golden code before snapping back to flesh. The world around them was beginning to pixelate. The war of the code. I'm done pleading, Naruto said. He didn't use a stance. He simply willed the universe to obey. Queens, execute the celestial override. The TTLE was a high-speed collision of concepts. Ignis and Kura didn't just attack with fire and ice, they attacked with the concepts of thermal motion and absolute stillness. They froze and burned the Otsutsuki priests out of the source. Vex wove illusions into the very code of the priests' minds, making them see errors where there was truth. Izanami drew the souls of the priests toward the trash bin of existence. While Ria slowed the priests' personal time to a standstill. Nihila, the newest pillar, acted as the ultimate delete key. Anything she touched was not just killed, but completely removed from the source's memory. The final patch. Naruto engaged Ashiki. This wasn't a fight of taijutsu, it was a struggle of wills. Ashiki tried to shrink Naruto's existence, but Naruto expanded his presence to fill the entire dimension. You're a parasite, Ashiki. Naruto roared, his voice vibrating through the crystalline sky. You take and you take, but you never contribute to the code. You're nothing but a bug in the system. Naruto reached out and grabbed the core pillar. The virus of the Otsutsuki tried to infect him, but he used the 6 paths, Sage of the 6 Pillars mode. He didn't just fight the virus. He rewrote himself to be the antivirus. With a surge of power that blinded the entire dimension, Naruto purged the null rods. He grabbed a Shiki by the throat and, instead of killing him, he formatted him. He stripped the Otsutsuki of his divine status, reducing him to a harmless, mortal soul, and sent him back to the reincarnation cycle of the underworld. The system restored. The pixelation stopped. The ribbons of code turned from a sickly red back to a brilliant, healthy gold. The source dimension stabilized, and the harem felt their forms become solid and permanent once more. Naruto stood before the core, his hand resting on the source of all chakra. He could have rewritten reality to make himself a literal god, to make everyone worship him, or to remove all pain. But he didn't. He added a single new line of code: free will. The dimensions shouldn't be governed by a script, Naruto whispered. They should be governed by the heart. The pillars gathered around him, exhausted but triumphant. But as they prepared to return to the celestial throne, the core pillar began to pulse with a new, strange rhythm. A voice, older than the source itself, spoke from the light. The king has repaired the machine, but the machine was built for a purpose. Is the king ready to meet his maker? End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12. The Architect's Blueprint. The source dimension dissolved. The geometric light and binary ribbons didn't break, they simply stepped aside, revealing a space of absolute, terrifying clarity. It was a workshop, a vast, infinite garden of unfinished ideas. Floating in the air were half-formed galaxies, sketches of new species, and discarded laws of physics. At the center of this cosmic workshop sat a figure draped in robes that looked like parchment, covered in moving ink. The figure had no face, only a swirling nebula where a head should be, and 4 arms that moved with the precision of a master weaver. This was the architect, the primordial consciousness that had penned the first line of the source code. The king of the 6 pillars, the architect spoke, the voice sounding like the scratching of a quill on paper. You have formed an unauthorized patch on my masterpiece. You have introduced free will into a system designed for order. Do you realize the chaos you have invited? The weight of the pen. Naruto stepped forward, his harem of goddesses forming a protective semi-circle behind him. Even here, at the root of reality, the bond of the harem held. Order is just another word for a prison if there's no choice, Naruto challenged. The Otsutsuki were the result of your order, a hierarchy that allowed the strong to eat the weak for eternity. The architect rose, standing 20 feet tall. The Otsutsuki were a failed experiment in ascension. You, however, are a mutation. You have gathered the dimensional anchors, the queens, not through conquest, but through union. You have turned my anchors into a family. This was not in the blueprint. The architect raised a hand, and the floor beneath Naruto became a literal page of history. Naruto saw his own life, the fox, the war, the loss, written in cold, black ink. The architect's quill hovered over the page. I could simply strike through your name, Naruto Uzumaki. I could rewrite the protagonist. Perhaps a king who is more obedient. The union's defiance. Before the quill could touch the page, the 6 goddesses acted. They didn't attack the architect, they anchored Naruto's story. You cannot erase what is felt. Ignis roared, her flames turning the white space into a sunset. Our marks are not written in ink, but in the heart. Izanami added, her spirit mist obscuring the architect's vision. Ria grabbed the flow of time around the architect's hand, slowing the quill to a crawl. Nihila expanded the space between the quill and the paper, creating an infinite distance that the ink could never bridge. Naruto looked the architect in the nebula face. You call yourself a creator, but you're just a spectator. You're afraid of the free will, I added because it means you can't predict the ending anymore. Naruto reached out and grabbed the architect's quill. The ink bled into Naruto's skin, turning his golden markings into a deep, regal black gold. He wasn't stealing the architect's power, he was becoming the company author. The new contract. I'm not here to kill you, Naruto said, his voice now carrying the weight of the architect's own authority. But the era of the grand script is over. From now on, the dimensions will write their own stories. You stay here and watch. If we fail, the void will take us. But if we succeed, we'll create something more beautiful than your order, ever was. The architect hesitated, the nebula eye, and its hood swirling with a new color, curiosity. A story without an ending, it is a terrifying concept. Very well, king of the harem. I shall put down my pen. But know this, by giving the dimensions their freedom, you have also given it to the primordial shadows, the things I chose not to write. The architect vanished, leaving Naruto and his queens in the center of the source. The garden of unfinished ideas began to bloom, the half-formed galaxies finally spinning into life. The looming dark, Naruto felt the shift immediately. Far beyond the edges of the known multiverse, in the unwritten spaces, something massive and ancient stirred. By removing the architect's control, Naruto had also removed the barriers that kept the non-existent monsters out. He wasn't joking, Vex whispered, her eyes wide with terror. The things that weren't supposed to be, they're coming. And they're hungry for existence. Naruto looked at his 6 goddesses in Hinata. They were the only defense left. Let them come, he said, his hand tightening around the invisible quill of reality. We've got a lot of chapters left to write. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13. The Siege of the Unwritten. The unwritten spaces were the margins of the universe, the places where the architect's ink had never touched. Now that the barriers were down, these margins were bleeding into reality. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like glitches in the sky. Massive, faceless titans of static and non-matter began to materialize over the Hidden Leaf Village and the Celestial Throne simultaneously. These were the anomalies, entities that represented every what if and never was that the architect had suppressed. They didn't want to conquer, they wanted to override reality with their own chaotic nothingness. They're not using chakra, Kakashi yelled from the ground of Konoha, his Reikiri flickering uselessly against a titan made of living white noise. Our jutsu is passing right through them. The king's descent. Naruto didn't hesitate, he split his consciousness. While his physical body stayed at the celestial throne with his pillars, he projected 6 celestial avatars to the major shinobi villages. In Konoha, the sky parted, and a Naruto of pure, black gold ink descended. Don't fight their bodies, he commanded, his voice echoing in the minds of every shinobi. Fight their lack of purpose. Use your bonds, remind them that this world is defined. But even with his guidance, the anomalies were relentless. They began to unexist, the villagers, turning people into gray statues of static. Naruto realized that even the power of the 6 pillars wasn't enough to fight something that didn't follow the laws of the source code. The mortal divine resonance. Naruto-kun, look, Hinata cried out from the throne. She was pointing at the marks on the queens. They were vibrating in sync with the prayers of the people on earth. The harem was not just a source of power, it was a frequency. We need to bridge the gap. Naruto realized, the goddesses provide the divine concept, but the people provide the mortal weight. If we combine them, we can give these anomalies a definition, and then we can kill them. Naruto commanded the 6 queens to link their powers not to him, but to the people they represented. Kura no Okami sent her essence to the land of iron, Ignis to the land of fire, Vex to the land of mist. Suddenly, the shinobi found their blades glowing with the colors of the goddesses. A Chidori wasn't just lightning anymore, it was the divine concept of storms. A Rasengan wasn't just a sphere of chakra, it was the core of a star. The battle of the definitions. The tide turned. With the mortal weight behind the divine concept, the static titans became solid. They gained faces, hearts, and, most importantly, vulnerabilities. Naruto, standing at the center of the celestial throne, performed the universal harem jutsu, infinite harmony. He didn't create clones, he merged he spirits of all 6 queens into a single, colossal entity of light and shadow. This, queen of all, swung a sword made of solidified time and void, cleaving the largest of the anomalies in half. As he static titans dissolved into harmless stardust, the people of the world looked up. They didn't just see Naruto as a hero, they saw the network he had built. They saw that their love and their lives were the fuel for the gods. The shadows whispers, but as the last anomaly faded, a shadow detached itself from the ground of the throne. It wasn't an anomaly, it was a reflection. It looked exactly like Naruto, but his eyes were the same white vacuum as Nihila's original form. You gave them freedom, the shadow Naruto whispered. But you forgot that freedom includes the right to hate you. Do you think they will always love a king who is so much more than them? The shadow pointed toward the mortal world. For the first time, Naruto saw it, a flicker of fear in the eyes of his friends. A seed of resentment that he had become a god while they remained mortal. The greatest war isn't against the unwritten, the shadow laughed. It's against the jealousy of those you saved. Naruto's heart saw NK as he felt the first crack in the harem's harmony, not from the queens, but from the world he was trying to protect. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. The Rebellion of the Mortal Heart. The victory over. The anomalies should have been a moment of triumph, but the atmosphere across the dimensions turned cold. The shadow Naruto had planted a seed of truth, the gap between the Celestial King and the Peep. Of Earth had become an unbridgeable chasm. To the shinobi below, Naruto was no longer the knuckle-headed ninja who loved ramen, he was a cosmic entity who moved stars and commanded goddesses. In the Hidden Leaf, a faction of shinobi, led by those who feared the divine overlord, began to whisper. They saw the golden marks appearing on women across the lands, the spiritual resonance of the harem, and called it a celestial shackle. He isn't one of us anymore, a bitter elder muttered in the council chambers. He's a god who treats our world like a board game. What happens when he grows bored of us? The fracturing of the faith. The discontent manifested as a literal rot in the ethereum. Naruto felt it, a stinging, acidic pain in his chest. Each doubt, each fear from a mortal heart felt like a needle piercing his soul. The queens felt it too. Ignis's fire grew erratic, fueled by the anger of the people, while Vex's illusions began to reflect the nightmares of the common folk. Naruto-kun, Hinata said, her voice trembling as she watched the great viewing pool. The people are arming themselves with anti-god seals left behind by the Otsutsuki. They think we are the new villains. Suddenly, a coalition of the 5 great nations, driven by fear and manipulated by the shadow Naruto's whispers, launched a strike. They didn't attack with kunai, they used a chakra null. Life fire, a device that cut the connection between the mortal and divine planes. The king's silence. Naruto stood on the edge of the celestial throne, looking down at his home. The nullifier hit the palace like a physical blow. The pillars cracked. Kura no Okami fell to her knees as her connection to the frost dimension flickered. Let me burn them, Ignis snarled, her mane of fire turning a vengeful crimson. Let me show them what happens when they bite the hand that saved their existence. No, Naruto said, his voice quiet but echoing with an agonizing sadness. If I use my power to suppress them, then I'm exactly the tyrant they fear I am. The shadow Naruto appeared beside him, a cruel smirk on his face. So you'll let them kill you? You'll let them destroy the throne and plunge the dimensions back into the Dark Ages? All for the sake of their feelings. The ultimate temptation. The shadow held out a hand. In it was the absolute seal, the power to rewrite the minds of every living being. One word, Naruto. One thought. You can make them love you. You can make them see the truth. You can turn the entire multiverse into a garden of perfect, mindless peace. Isn't that what you always wanted? No more war. No more hate. Naruto looked at the seal. He looked at his suffering queens, who were being drained of their essence by the very people they protected. He could end it all. He could be the perfect king. He reached for the seal, his fingers brushing the cold, dark energy. Naruto. Hinata's voice cut through the darkness. She wasn't standing as a queen or a pillar. She was standing as the girl who had watched him from behind a tree when they were 5. If you take away their right to hate you, you take away their right to be human. Don't become a god of puppets. The sacrifice of sovereignty. Naruto's hand froze. He looked at the queens. He saw the pain in their eyes, but he also saw their unwavering trust. He realized that a harem of power was nothing compared to a harem of choice. He didn't use the absolute seal on the people. He used it on himself. Naruto shattered the seal, and in doing so, he shattered the divine barrier he had built around himself. He stripped away his untouchable aura, descending to earth not as a king, but as a man. He landed in the center of the hidden leaf, standing before the gathered armies, his golden cloak vanished, his skin bare and vulnerable. If you want to kill the god, Naruto shouted, his voice cracking with emotion, then here I am. But if you kill me, you don't just kill a king. You kill the bridge, you kill the only thing holding the void at bay. The armies wavered. The sight of Naruto, scarred, bleeding from the strain, and human, did what no divine power could. It broke the spell of fear. The shadow Naruto shrieked as the lack of belief that sustained him evaporated. The final warning. The rebellion ended not with a bang, but with a sob. The people realized their error, but the damage was done. By PPing his divinity to prove his humanity, Naruto had weakened the seals on the final dimension. As Naruto collapsed into Hinata's arms on the dusty streets of Konoha, the sky above the village turned a deep, bruised gold. The architect's final prophecy was coming true. The grand design was ending, and the true origin, the mother of all Otsutsuki and the goddess of the first chakra, was descending to reclaim her stolen power. She's here, Izanami whispered from the fading spirit realm. Kagaya 0, the one who ate the first fruit of the multiverse. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15. The Symphony of the Eternal Heart. The sky didn't just change color, it ceased to be sky. The firmament of the mortal world peeled back like old parchment, revealing the primal womb of the multiverse. From this void descended a figure that made the previous Kagaya look like a mere shadow. This was Kagaya 0, the progenitor who had consumed the fruit of the original god tree at the dawn of the first dimension. She did not have 2 eyes or 3, her entire body was etched with blinking, golden eyes that saw through time, matter, and soul. Her hair was not white, but a flowing river of pure chakra that stretched across the horizon, weaving itself into the foundations of the world to pull it apart. My children have played with my sparks for too long, Kagaya 0 spoke, her voice the vibration of the universe's creation. I have come to gather the light. The harem, the king, the mortal, all shall be folded back into the one. The last stand of the 6 pillars. Naruto stood in the ruins of Konoha, his body trembling from the loss of his divine armor. But as Kagaya 0's gravity began to crush the planet, the 6 goddesses descended from the fading throne. They didn't come as regal queens, but as warriors. We are not sparks to be gathered. Ignis roared, her flames turning a brilliant, defiant white. We are the anchors of the now. Rhea shouted, freezing the local time to prevent the world's immediate collapse. The battle was a cataclysm of conceptual forces. Kagaya 0 moved her hands, and entire continents in other dimensions vanished. She was uncreating reality. Naruto realized that even the combined power of his pillars couldn't defeat the source of all chakra in a contest of strength. We can't win by fighting her, Naruto gasped, his vision blurring as Kagaya 0 began to drain his life force. We have to show her that the fruit has changed. The tree has grown too many branches to be pulled back into a single seed. The infinite harem, the union of all souls. Naruto closed his eyes and reached out. He didn't just call upon the 6 queens, he called upon every soul he had touched across 15 chapters of conquest and compassion. He linked the hearts of the shinobi on earth, the spirits in the underworld, the weavers in the chrono nexus, and the shadows in the void. This was the ultimate evolution of the harem, the resonance of the multiverse. Hinata, give me the mortal link. Naruto cried. Hinata took his hand, her Byakugan bleeding into a Tensegan of pure sapphire. The 6 queens placed their hands on Naruto's back, forming a living circuit. Naruto's body began to glow with a light that surpassed the sun. He wasn't the Celestial King anymore. He was the Celestial All-Father. He lunged toward Kagaya 0, not with a fist, but with an open palm. The Great Integration. As Naruto touched the progenitor, he didn't try to seal her. He integrated her. He flooded her ancient, lonely mind with the collective experiences of a billion lives, the taste of salt, the sting of loss, the warmth of a lover's touch, and the thrill of choice. Kagaya 0's golden eyes widened. For eons, she had known only hunger and order. Now, she felt the chaotic, beautiful noise of life. The one was being shattered by the power of many. The cycle, it cannot be contained, Kagaya 0 whispered, her form beginning to dissolve into petals of cherry blossoms and stardust. You have outgrown the garden, Naruto Uzumaki. With a final, silent explosion of white light, Kagaya 0 didn't die, she became the atmosphere. Her essence scattered, returning the stole chakra to every living being in every dimension. The God tree was gone, replaced by a billion individual seeds of potential in every soul. The era of the Star King. The dust settled, the dimensions remained, but the walls between them were now translucent. People could look up and see the aurora of the frost dimension or the golden gears of the chrono nexus. Naruto sat on the steps of the rebuilt Hokage office, his 6 queens and Hinata sitting around him. He was no longer a god of absolute power, he was the arbiter of harmony. His harem was not a collection of wives, but a council of the worlds, ensuring that no one dimension ever grew too cold or too hot. So, Kurama's voice echoed in his mind, sounding satisfied. What's next, kid? You've united the dimensions, defeated the architect, and outlasted the progenitor. Naruto looked at the horizon, where the suns of 3 different worlds were setting simultaneously. He looked at the women by his side, his pillars, his partners, his family. Now, Naruto grinned, his blue eyes finally returning to their natural, mischievous spark. Now, I think it's time we go get some ramen. I hear there's a shop in the 5th dimension that makes a broth out of nebula dust. The king stood, and as he walked into the sunset of 1,000 worlds, the multiverse finally began to breathe on its own. The story was no longer written by gods or architects. It was written by them. End of chapter 15. And so, the dimensions fell silent. Not because war ended, but because a higher will took control. Naruto Uzumaki did not erase the gods. He surpassed the need for them. As the Celestial Harem King, he became the balance between love and destruction. The flame that warmed worlds, and the sun that judged tyrants. The dimensions now moved to a single rhythm. The rhythm of his will. But this is not the end. Because when one reality is mastered, another always waits to be rewritten. If you want to witness the next evolution of the Will of Fire, stay with us. This was Will of Fire Stories, where legends don't fade, they ascend. Until the next awakening.